Welcome to Fresh Off the Boat. My name is Arjun Seth, and I run EdBrand, which is a college admissions consulting company based in New Delhi, India. Today, I'm delighted to be reconnecting with Tanvi Puri, a student I've known since maybe 2012 or 13. And then that's when she graduated from high school around 2014 and went to Washington University in St. Louis, which was an interesting decision. And we'll come to that story a little bit later. So Tanvi, welcome. And why don't you introduce yourself in your own way? I'll get to know you.
So hi, I'm Tanvi. I think all the way from kindergarten through grade 12, I was at the Shri Ram School, first in Vasant Vihar and then at Mulsari. And I was fairly clear that I wanted to go to the US for college, I think, from the very beginning. And I met Arjun, I think, start of grade 11, end of grade 11, somewhere in that window, and worked with him, and like he said, ended up at Washington University, and I think it was probably bar none the best decision I've made career-wise. So I'm really grateful, and hey, thank you to you.
Thanks
for getting me there.
So, about WashU, obviously when you were applying, there was a bit of hesitation in sort of adding that school, and also since you were fairly sure that you wanted to start something in life sciences or even a pre-med track, that's the reason why we thought of that school as the right one for you. But how was it like settling in at WashU? What expectations did you have, and what actually happened in the first few weeks, months, semesters?
So before I ever got to WashU, I mean, in the fall semester, I went to visit. So I was, I think, deciding between Berkeley and WashU and Georgetown, and I visited all of them. And when I went to WashU, I had zero expectations. I was convinced I was going to Berkeley. There's no question. And I went there and I fell in love with the place and the people, and they were super welcoming. They were aware that I was an international student, of all the different things that I might need from them versus a domestic student. Here's the things that we take care of, here's the food that we have, here's the dorms. And so when I actually arrived in August, my expectations were fairly high. I wasn't all that nervous. I knew they'd take care of me. My resident advisors had reached out to me ahead of time. My academic advisors had reached out to me ahead of time. And so those first few weeks actually went by really quickly. And I assimilated faster than I would have thought. I started to get homesick around Thanksgiving, but I think that's, everybody's experience regardless of college. But I think WashU did a really good job keeping us socially entertained the first few weeks of college and providing lots and lots and lots of support.
Fantastic. Also about academics, right? It's a very different pace from being in a school in Indian curriculum sort of system. How was it like in terms of adjusting? What resources did you use? And then finally, what tracks did you sort of kind of show interest in?
Academically, I think when you're in it depends on the school you go to, but like as somebody that, was in the ICSE curriculum, and, I know my other friends from Shri Ram and, friends from Vasant Valley and Step by Step and GDO, we all feel like we have a good command over the English language. And at WashU, everybody, including the engineers, everybody has to take, writing one the first semester. And you go there and you're like, I really don't know how to write. But so that's the kind of thing that I did use a lot of college resources with. There are people in the library, in the writing department who are willing to help and willing to support you and willing to proofread your essays. But on the other hand, I did science and math in grade 11 and 12 in high school. So taking Calc 1 was like, okay, I don't need to worry about this. This is not my problem class this semester. So I think the general point here is that the academics that you take, one, depend on your background, but I think writing is something that we all work on in college as graduates from within the Indian school system. And then I knew I was interested in biology and stuff. So I was then, more geared towards taking chemistry and biology courses. And then, that sort of funneled my interests for later things. And maybe you had some follow-up questions in there, but I've forgotten.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Since you knew that you were interested in life sciences, biology, and chemistry, so was there some like advising where you could map out when to do what? And over the years, then your interest or even declaration of the major was kind of
Right.
coordinated with those conversations?
For sure. So what WashU does is they assign you an academic advisor before you get to college. So the same person who'd spoken to me in, say, like July, before I even arrived in August, was Jason. He stuck with me for 4 years. So they talk to you about, here are the things you're interested in. Here are the various requirements you would need to take to graduate with a liberal arts degree. You have to take certain classes in each department. And then they sort of help you structure. So you meet with this person every semester before you register. And so, the first semester is kind of, you're exploring, you're figuring out what you like, you're seeing, my friends in this class, I might be interested in taking this. And then they really help you structure and build what it is that you're interested in based on, are you planning to travel abroad? Do you want to do a double major? I ended up taking, I think it was a scheduling thing and I needed a social science class. So I ended up taking intro to macroeconomics, I think my second semester at WashU. And then I was like, oh my God, I love this. So I was like, I ended up getting a minor in economics before I graduated. I was like 3 classes short of a major or something, just because, my advisor was able to help me work out like, you have to fulfill this, but this can be taken in the econ department. So having a support structure from within the university who sort of understands the way these very complex cross-listed courses work is really helpful. Also, somebody who knows who the good professors are. So if you know how to people, ask your seniors who've taken the class before.
And not just believe in rateyourprofessor.com.
No, I don't think Rate Your Professor has been updated since 2016. So.
Okay, so let's talk about your major: biology, life sciences, chemistry, and all of that. How did you find the topics, courses, classes that were interesting to you? And there are obviously many ways you can complete requirements for a biology major.
Right.
What was your path?
So I guess, again, this will vary by institution, but WashU in particular has different streams within the biology major. There's a general biology major, which is what the majority of people take. And then there's an ecology and microbiology subtrack. And then there's a biochemistry subtrack. And then there's a neuroscience subtrack. And I believe the neuroscience is the only one that has a GPA requirement. Everywhere else, it's just, the types of courses you choose to take. I ended up in the neuroscience one because that's what I was interested in. And the way that WashU biology works is that you need like maybe 8 or 11 biology courses by the time you graduate. And, one of each of them has to be in each of these core areas. Like one has to be from general biology, one has to be from ecology and microbiology, one has to be from biochemistry, and one has to be from neuroscience. And then beyond that, you get to build and pick what you're interested in entirely based on what you care about. The only real requirements are that, if you're graduating with a biology major, there have to be a certain level. You can't take all intro courses. There has to be a certain 300 level course and a certain number of 400 level courses. But other than that, it was really like, do what you're interested in, figure out what you're interested in, and follow that. And they were really very supportive of making that work.
Sure. So let's talk more about neuroscience, since that was kind of a capped major with biology. What is it that you study at the undergrad level for neuroscience majors to complete requirements?
Neuroscience, everybody can take the basic core neuroscience courses, intro to neurophysiology, neuroanatomy. Everybody who wants to take those courses can. The only reason that there's a cap is that there is something called a lab of neurophysiology that really only has 36 spots. They cannot do more than that. And that's because it's a really, really advanced lab class. And you end up doing techniques that I'm now in a PhD program. And there are people who don't know how to do the techniques that we learned in that class. So that class is very specialized. At the end of it, you end up writing like 3 manuscripts or research papers. And you learn how to do like single neuron recordings. You learn how to record electrical signals from a single neuron, from a single retinal cell in an eye. You learn to stimulate a frog nerve the way you need to get it to do something else. And so that is a very, that's the only, like, that's what caps it. That's what makes it. So, that's the class people want to take. And all you have to do for that is essentially, like, if you're interested in it, let people know well in advance.
Yeah, so I think the manuscripts and the research sounds fascinating, and the examples you gave were fantastic. So what were the few manuscripts you worked on, and few other things that were going on, which other students were working on, which were fairly fascinating?
So we sort of, so they ran it like a lab. So what they did was, like, you made a research team for each week, for that entire class that you stuck with for the entire semester. So for 1/3 of the semester, we worked on the eye from a horseshoe crab, like a single eye, and we drill and extract it and then record from the retina. And then so there were 3 of us in a team, and we had 3 projects. One was recording from the ear cell of a rat, one was from the horseshoe crab, and the other was from a single crawfish neuron, single cell recording from a crawfish neuron. So each of us were, like, the primary investigator on one of those. And we'd write up the entire manuscript from start to finish. And of course, the third one was much better than the first one, because that's how you learn. But it was a really interesting process, and that's what, like, after I took that class, I was like, you know what, I think grad school is something that I can do, because this, like, I enjoy this process.
Very cool. So of course you also went in thinking that pre-med and being a practicing doctor could be something, and I always felt that, yeah, Tanvi definitely looks like one of those people who has the empathy, who really is smart, can be a great doctor. So how do those decisions pan out eventually for you, since you chose to become a researcher? A PhD track is very different from a medicine track.
Yes. And so it actually started out as, like, you go, you enter college and you're a pre-med, and, like, about 60% of the biology majors are pre-med, and everybody's like, to get into a good med school, like, you have to do research, it has to be something that you have to get on your CV and blah, blah. So, like, overly enthusiastic, freshman that I was like writing to professors, can I come and work in your lab? Of course, I don't know how to do anything. And so I got actually really lucky. And I ended up working with somebody called Dr. Eric Herzog. And right, I think at the end of the spring semester as a freshman, I started working with him. And then that first summer, I came back to work in the lab. And I just had a great time. But I think up until, like, maybe a year and a half after that also, I was like, I'm doing this so I can go to med school. Like, this is something that's going on my resume, kind of thing, And then I was just talking to another grad student in the lab, and I was like, this is a great job, and he's so great, and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, okay, so what do you want to do with your life? And I said, go to medical school. And they were like, why? I thought you just said you enjoyed this. And then I was like, why? And I was like, wait, this is a great job. And by then I'd also shadowed some doctors, and while I have enormous appreciation for what they do, I realized that I was more interested in science and being able to test things and being able to have answers. And that just, the approach to science appealed to me. And so I stuck with it. I was like, oh, this is fun.
And then you obviously continued your interest in neuroscience.
Yeah. And so Herzog runs a neuroscience lab. And then I was an author on a paper out of his lab. And then it just went from there.
Interesting. So let's switch gears and talk about, generally WashU and the quality of life at the city and St. Louis, and of course, neighboring areas. What are the myths about living in the Midwest, in a very big city in the Midwest? And what is the reality, or the good and the bad that comes with it?
You won't ever find really good sushi. That was the big downside. But I feel like people have a lot to say about St. Louis. Like, are there disadvantages to living in St. Louis? Yes, there is. For example, there's no direct flight to India. I'd always fly to New York and fly there. And people who are living, in San Francisco or New York have the advantage of, slightly more convenience. But I actually really, really love living in St. Louis. I visit still whenever I can, because WashU and St. Louis and WashU, Northwestern, a lot of these campuses, they're campuses that are close to cities, but they're still a campus. So it's almost like a gated community. There's a huge sense of security and comfort. I mean, WashU is gorgeous. If you've never been, it's, really a very pretty campus. And the city of St. Louis and WashU kind of support each other a lot. So, as a student in the city, you have advantages of hockey games. They recently won the Stanley Cup and baseball games, and WashU subsidizes all of that. And they have like the largest urban park in the US and, like right at your door. And so there's big advantages to living in a Midwestern city where people are nice. There's not as much traffic. There are some disadvantages, like public transport isn't as good as it would be in, say, Manhattan. Less rats though. But so I think overall it's one of those really underrated cities to live in. And I think it's definitely, like, anybody who's considering WashU, visit it, and I think you'll have a really, really difficult time turning it down.
Well said, well said. How did you get involved socially on campus life? I know you became a resident assistant or something.
Advisor, yeah.
Advisor. But before that, like which clubs and what is it that you really did for fun?
So freshman year, I was not involved in as many clubs per se, because our floor community was really great and really tight. And I realized that, clubs are often a way for people to reach out and make friends and stuff. But we just ended up hanging out in the hallway so much that I never ended up, regularly attending other clubs. But later on, I got involved with like a decent number of volunteer organizations. I was helping teach young kids. I was helping tutor other chemistry students after I'd taken chem my freshman year. So sophomore year, I got involved in those mentoring jobs. Socially, there was like an Indian students community. I'd hang out with those guys. And then I don't know how it happened, but my social group just happened to involve people who were working with different organizations. So it's like, oh, my friend is doing this, I'll join that. So, I ended up like spearheading this thing called Locks for Love, which, donated hair to cancer patients or something, different ages of cancer patients. And I did that for, I think for 3 years. So it just, it was something that happened organically. I didn't end up joining a whole bunch of different clubs. So I was, a part of PLTL, and I was a part of Locks for Love and a bunch of service communities, but I didn't do, I wasn't part of a dance club.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. I think that's where your empathetic side also. That's great. So if you were to look at decisions you finally made, like going to grad school and now shifting to Canada and being in Vancouver, which is, I guess, a very different location. How was that decision? Why is the UBC program good for you? And what is it that you're doing?
So grad school decisions, I find, are made pretty differently than undergrad decisions, because when you're picking grad school, and it also varies, but a lot of times you go into grad school because you want to work with somebody on something. You obviously have no idea what your PhD thesis is going to be, but you're like, this is a general area that I'm interested in. So when I applied here, it was to work with the professor that I'm currently working with or one other person. And it just so happened that, of the places that I was considering and, interviewed and got offers from, this was the person who, after interviewing, I was like, this is who I want to work with. And if anybody is considering graduate school out there, the mentor that you pick is the most important. So don't go with the school name, don't go with the location, even though I lucked out with both of those, but go with somebody you really think you can work with, because you're going to have a much more personal and intimate working relationship.
Fantastic. So what's the neuroscience kind of depth that you were seeking that you're now working on? What are the topics that interest you now?
So when I was an undergrad, I was working on circadian rhythms and things like that. So, sleep cycles, and then somebody was collaborating with my professor Herzog at the time, and working on how sleep cycles influence pregnancy. And then I got into a whole bunch of pregnancy research. So when I was applying for graduate school, I was really interested in the effect of pregnancy on the brain. And so that's what I'm working on now is postmenopausal hormone therapy and the effect of pregnancy on the brain in the long term. So that's what I'm working on now.
Great. And the PhD program's sometimes never ending, right? It takes 5-7 years or something else. But
yeah, there's no defined timeline. As long as you get your courses done, you're on.
Yeah, but being close to a beautiful campus in a good city is obviously helpful. So tell us a little bit about Vancouver, and also what is it that you like about it?
I mean, Vancouver is gorgeous. It's almost inhuman that people get to live here all the time. It's really unfair because, I mean, there's the mountains for the people that like to ski and hike, and there's the ocean that for people who want to. I mean, I'm a grad student who doesn't pay a whole lot for her apartment, and I live like a 4-minute walk from the beach, maybe, which is really, really unbelievably lucky. And, you know, it has great public transport. It's really very safe. Which is something that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily walk, like even large cities like Manhattan or Chicago or whatever, I wouldn't necessarily walk around at night there as comfortably as I would in Vancouver. And I mean, yeah, it rains a little bit. I'm more than happy to deal with it. It really is.
Sounds cool. Sounds
it's
fun.
a very nice place to live.
Fantastic. I don't know. Do you have responsibilities to work with undergraduate students as part of your job? Okay, so what do you do?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. So you know, I worked with a grad student when I was an undergrad. My first, I'm actually very proud. My first undergraduate student just defended her thesis a month or so ago and did well. So I'm very proud of that. So I think it's just that sort of never-ending cycle, you know, where you see one do, one teach one. Almost, you know, I learned from my graduate student what to do and what not to do. You know, when I was an undergrad, and I take those lessons forward. And I think for undergrads that are looking to do research, or regardless of whether you want to go to graduate school or you want to go to medical school or you just want a job, because quite frankly, for international students, you can't really get a job outside of your university. Because your F1 rules and things like that don't allow you to do that, but you can work at the university under the F1 rules. So working in a lab is a really great way to make some money. And who knows, you might end up doing something you love. So
yeah, that's a good tip for sure.
It's good stuff, yeah.
So yeah, let's move towards our last few questions, and these are rapid fire.
Oh God.
You seem to be, you know, this super successful person, never done anything wrong kind of person. But let's just say, if you were to reflect back on embarrassing moments after moving to the US or now to Canada, or failures or difficulties that you face, what reflections do you have from some of these events?
One, everyone has them. And somebody who pretends that they don't is probably a little bit insecure and lying. The first ever floor meeting I had, so I don't know why it is, but I just switch between an Indian and an American accent depending on who I'm talking to. And I think it was like my first week, and we had like a floor discussion on some topic, and I was like, I started off in this fairly flawless American accent, and that's what I'd spoken to people in during the previous week. And of course, now it's much more, you know,
organic.
I don't have to think about it. But that first day that we were in a large discussion, I was, you know, it was American accent, and mid-sentence, it just shifted right back to Delhi. And the entire floor, like, turned to look at me. And it was like, is somebody else speaking out of her mouth? Like, she has an accent, like, what? And, you know, I was like, that's it. I'm never going to have any friends on this floor. You know, oh my God. And now it's like something we laugh about. So many of my friends are like, oh my God, that's the first time we realized you were from India. And, you know, that's how they ended up talking to me. So, like, if you hear things your first week, don't worry about it. I've also, like, heard about people who were like, oh, you know, I went and cried in this professor's office. And up until my senior year, till I was writing my thesis, and I was like, you guys need to get a grip. Like seriously, you cry in your own room, and lo and behold, like senior spring, I was one of my mentors, who's actually like a good friend of mine now, but is a professor who I TA'd for, and I was like, oh, man, I can't do this. So don't be ashamed to put yourself out there. You're gonna fall on your face. It's fine. You'll get back up, and you'll have a fun scar, and you'll have a story to tell, and then that's how you need party anecdotes. So
Sure.
so don't hold back.
Very cool. Yeah, I think being authentic and honest about what you've gone through, it's more endearing to people. So that's fantastic. Again, great stories for personal essays or whatever. You don't have to write those anymore for
Thank
college.
God. I think after my PhD application, I was done with those.
Yeah. So what advice would you give people dealing with uncertainty, young people dealing with uncertainty, high school kids who graduated, don't know what to do about college, or people who've lost their jobs or internships right out of college?
I don't know that I'm the best person to give advice on this, because uncertainty is like one of my biggest, like, I don't know how to deal with it. But I guess my best recommendation would be, go with your gut. If there are a lot of times that I find myself saying, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Like, this is a terrible situation. And then if I think about it for a little while, it's like there is an option. It's just the really difficult option that I really don't want to do. Sometimes it's good to push yourself in that direction. And my other biggest advice is ask for advice. Like, not from everybody, because you're going to get 20 different things thrown at you, but like anybody, people who you trust. Like, if there is some conflict in your head that you're torn about and thinking about, talking about it always helps. Even if the other person doesn't have a concrete suggestion, the minute you say it out loud, I think it simplifies some things. So don't keep it in your own head exclusively.
That's fantastic. My last question is, dealing with COVID and the lockdown. I know you're lucky to be in Vancouver. Things haven't been so bad compared to, say, Manhattan. But in general, what have you discovered about yourself working from home? Spending a lot of time with yourself alone, I guess. What is it that you're doing for your mind, body, and soul to, or hope to do, or plan to do, and haven't done anything about?
The first thing that I've learned is I'm not good at working close to a kitchen, because I'll just go and cook. The first couple of weeks of lockdown, I just finished a major animal project, and so I was like, I think I bought like an insane amount of groceries and then cooked through all of them in a week, and I was like, okay, now I have too much food. I need to go find friends to give this to. So the biggest thing I learned about myself in lockdown is that I need a schedule. And it took me a long time to realize that about myself, because, I would go to work every day and I'd come home, and then occasionally I'd say, you know what, I have some writing to do. I'm going to work from home. And I worked great from home when I was working from home 1 day a week. And now now that I'm home all the time, I'm like, and I think it's an important thing to realize about yourself is that I need structure. If I wake up in the morning, I need to put on proper clothes, or that day is just waste. And it may seem stupid, but putting on jeans every morning is the only way I get work done. And so I think it's just, you have to figure out little things about yourself and then hopefully act on them. Some days I decide I don't want to put on jeans, and that's my excuse to not do any work that day.
So are there any influencers, authors, YouTube people that you like to read, follow, watch?
I mean, I listen to a whole bunch of like frivolous podcasts. My Twitter is my main source of news and world anxiety. This is happening and that is happening, and especially with the Black Lives Matter movement and all of that, which was something. So when I was in St. Louis, I was in, we were 8 miles from Ferguson, and that was the year that Michael Brown had been killed. So there was, I was fortunate enough to get a lot of education about the movement at the time. But personally in lockdown, I find that I need to dissociate a little bit. So the things that I'm currently reading and listening to are either funny or fiction or both. So I'm currently rereading Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, because you know what? I'm like, I need something that gets me away. So I alternate between listening to the New York Times 1619 podcast and listening to or reading Tina Fey's book.
Wonderful. So thanks. Thanks. It was just delightful to reconnect, Tanvi, and look forward to
Thanks for
following
having me.
more success. And we do have students kind of interested in what you were initially looking at, pre-med, and also
Awesome.
other tracks in biology. I'll definitely put a panel together, and hopefully, if time zone sort of situation.
Yeah, for sure. You can put them
Love
in
to
touch
have
with
you
me.
over. Super. Thanks. Take care.
No problem. Yeah, Arjun.